Rajan, who I met and who asked me to present a paper here. I hope I'm audible. And also thanks to Moshni, who contacted me and we figured this out. We planned this paper. And I was presenting much later, but then I thought I had this paper ready, so why not just present it as early as possible. So, the first thing came to my mind when I was coming here that we are actually nothing new, but still we are living in these phase where students, apart from the classroom and education in the classroom, we are also having to, fight and voice our opinions on a lot of important issues that are going on in the world, around universities and stuff like that. There are things happening in Calcutta, things happening in Delhi. So I guess these are bad times as well as very exciting times where students as a community are getting to voice their opinions, their protests, and basically registering their voice. And to me, in many ways, it sometimes sounds like the 1960s, where students all around the world in Europe were doing a lot of exciting things. And these are also in that way, I think, very exciting times, despite the fact that we are actually struggling against a lot of nasty things that are happening around. So well, in that background of things, I will present this very, very bleak paper. But again, though it's pretty bleak, there are a lot of interesting and right things to ponder on and really engage with. And in fact, as you can see, as you read, that it's very interesting that in bleak times and in bleak text, there is a strange kind of hope that we find coming out of apparently in every bleak text. So this is also one of them, and hopefully we'll extract some amount of hope from this bleakness. I got into Paul Celan just last year. I've been reading him. Before that, I heard about this speech, this very famous speech called the Meridian, which he had read in December 22 of 1916. You mostly know about Paul Celan. He was this Jewish poet during the Nazi period in Germany, and after a very prolonged problems that he faced in life after his family were killed in the concentration camp. So he finally committed suicide. But before committing suicide, he did write a lot, and there is this particular speech which I got interested in because this speech is supposed to be one of the most important documents of poetics in the last century. It's a very, very elliptic, elusive, very, very tricky kind of a text, very difficult. And yet, the more you read this text, the more I've been reading this text, the more I've been trying to, I have found things really, pouring out of it. And also, since my interest basically lies in three things. One which I'm trained in, which is political science, politics, political theory, philosophy. The second is philosophy per se. and third is poetry. And in Celan and in Celan's work, I found all these three things really jostling together, and so that basically brought me to Celan and Celan's poetry, and plus this particular speech where he actually talks about what he means by poetry and other things. So what I thought I'll do is, before I read out this paper, I will read a little bit for 5 minutes. I will read from the text, from Celan's text, to give you a flavor of how he writes and what are the things he's talking about. And after this, then I'll present the paper. So and this, in fact, this is also pretty new to me. I'm also new to this text, and basically there are supposed to be this 300 pages of notes which he had written before finally writing down these 16 pages, which became this speech, the Meridian. I'm yet to get hold of those 300 pages. And also there are a few things I'll let you know as I keep going along. So first I'll read from this text for 5 minutes to just give you a flavor of the text. So this is the Meridian speech on the occasion of receiving the Georg Buchner Prize, 22nd October 1960. Ladies and gentlemen, art, you will remember, is a pocket-like, iambic, 5-footed thing without, and this last characteristic has its mythological validation in Pygmalion and its statue without offspring. In this form, it is the subject of a conversation in Darrington's death, which takes place in a room not yet in the concealed, a conversation which we feel could go on forever if there were no snacks. There are snacks. Art comes up again. It comes up. Another work of Georg Buchner in Vozier. Vozier, by the way, is also has been made into a film by Werner Herzog. Some of you might have seen the film. Among others, name these people in a yet more passionate light before the storm. If I may use the phrase, Morty's payment intended for 10th step. Here, in very different times, art comes presented by a carnival barker and has no longer, as in that conversation, anything to do with glowing, roaring, radiant creation, but is put next to the creature as God made it, and the nothing this creature is wearing. This time, art comes in the shape of a monkey. But it is art all right. We recognize it by its coat and trousers. Art, ladies and gentlemen, with all its attributes and future editions, is also a problem, and as we can see, one that is variable, tough, long-lived, let us say eternal. But when there is talk of art, there is often somebody who does not really listen. More precisely, somebody who hears, listens, looks, and then does not know what it was about. But who hears the speaker, sees him speaking, who perceives language as a physical shape, and also who could doubt it within Buchner's work, breadth, that is direction and destiny. I'm talking, you've long guessed it, as she comes to you year after year, not by accident, quoted so frequently. I'm talking of Lucy. Lucy is a character from one of Buchner's plays. So I'll do violence to this text. I'll read very randomly from wherever I feel like, just to give you a flavor of what I said. True, it sounds in the context of what I now today dare say about it, this is precisely no accident. It sounds at first an allegiance to the ancient regime. It is homage to the majesty of the absurd, which bespeaks the presence of living beings. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, has no definitive name, but I believe that this is poetry. Art, oh art, besides being changeable, has a gift of ubiquity. We find it again in lens, but let me stress this as it adds instead only as an episode. So far he's still talking about Buchner and Buchner's characters and the characters in Buchner's plays and stories. Lenz, Lucid, Danton, these are all characters from Buchner's plays and stories. This means, please note, ladies and gentlemen, one would like to be a Medusa's head, to seize the natural as the natural by means of art. One would like to, by the way, not I would. This means going beyond what is human, stepping into a realm which is turned toward the human, but uncanny. The realm where the monkey, the automations, and with them, art too, seems to be at home. Ladies and gentlemen, I have raised my acute accent. I cannot hide from you any more than from myself that if I took my question about art and poetry, a question among others, if I took it of my own, though perhaps not free, will to Buchner, it was in order to find his way of asking it. It was also mentioned here that when Celan was presenting this paper, he was presenting it to a very hostile crowd. They were mostly German high academic people who had taken in some way or the other part in the Nazi endeavor. And also because Celan spoke a very different kind of German, a German which was so-called contaminated by Yiddish and other influences. So there was a lot of hostility around him getting the prize. So he spoke partly in many ways countering and challenging the idea of art and poetry that was very prevalent in Germany during that time. Now I must ask, does Buchner, the poet of the creature, not call art into question and from this direction? A challenge perhaps muted, perhaps only half-conscious, but for all that, perhaps because of that, no less essentially radical. A challenge to which all poetry must return if it wants to question further. In other words, and leaving off many of the steps, maybe like many of our contemporaries take art for granted or absolutely given, should be, to put it concretely, should we think of Milan, for example, through to the end? I'm not looking for a way out. I'm only pushing the question further in the same direction, which is, I think, also the direction of the lens fragment. Perhaps, and I'm only speculating, perhaps poetry like art moves with the oblivious self into the uncanny and strange to free itself. Through where, in which place, how, as what? This would mean art is a distance poetry must cover, no less and no more. I know there are other shorter routes, but poetry too can be ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, it is very common today to complain of the obscurity of poetry. Allow me to quote a bit abruptly, but do we not have a sudden opening here? A phrase of Pascal's which I read in Leo Chessor. There's a quote in French. This obscurity, if it is not congenital, has been bestowed on poetry with strangeness and distance and for the sake of an encounter. And this idea of the encounter will keep coming back in a big way in Celan and in this speech. Poetry is perhaps this, and at Wednesday, a turning of our breath. This is also very central in Celan, the idea of poetry as breathing, and a particular kind of breathing, and also turning away from breathing. Who knows, perhaps poetry goes its way, the way of art, for the sake of just such a turn, and since the strange, the abyss, and Medusa's head, abyss and the automation all seem to lie in the same direction. It is perhaps this turn, this attenvende, which can sort out the strange from the strange. It is perhaps here, in this one brief moment, that Medusa's head shrivels and the automations run down. Perhaps we can say that every poem is marked by its 20th of January. 20th of January is the date in which this character ends in Buchner's story, who is an 18th century visionary poet. He commits suicide. 20th of January, incidentally, is also the date when the Nazis start the pogrom against Jews. So these things will come back in terms of the importance of dates and stuff, which are given when I read the paper. In other words, language actualized, set free under the sign of radical individuation, which, however, remains aware of the limits long as language as a possibility is opening. The poem is lonely. It is lonely and en route. Its author stays with it. Does this very fact not place the poem already here in its inception, in the encounter, in the mystery of the encounter? The poem intends another, needs this other, needs an opposite. It goes toward it, bespeaks it. For the poem, everything and everybody is a figure of this other toward which it is heading. Ladies and gentlemen, I am coming to the end. I am coming along with my acute accent to the end and also to the beginning. So I'll end it here just to give you a flavor of the speech. It's a very difficult, obscure party and a speech varies every to many people. So now I'll read you this equally obscure paper. I hope you can fall asleep. Okay, so the title of my paper is Paul Celan and the Future of the Poem. I'll explain the title itself in the first paragraph and we'll see how it goes. The name Paul Celan is the title, in the title, refers not only to Paul Celan the poet, but also Paul Celan who talks about poetry. Celan is in dialogue with his craft, with others in his craft, as well as in dialogue with those he feels eliminate the possibilities and problems of his craft, that is, poetry. So Paul Celan in the title is a poet who asks questions about poetry, including the fundamental question, what is poetry? The word future in the title does not mean an unspecified free idea of a future out there, future as such, but specific moment or moments in future time that have a correspondence with the past. A past's future that creates a new reference point across time. But because this future is the future of the poem, a solitary product of time, the idea of the future here is not to be imagined in collective terms, nor is this future a private one, because a poem is always intended for a reader. So a poem strictly belonging to neither the individual nor the collective is always in relation to the world. That relation is of course political, and it tends towards the ethical. The conjunction "and" in the title, Paul Celan and the future of the poem. So that "and" in the title means the future of the poem is not reducible to the name Paul Celan, but is seen in conjunction with the poet's idea of the poet's future. I wrote into Celan's brain what he revealed to a friend as a dark summer. In his acceptance speech, Celan delved into German dramatist Buchner's works to chart out his views on art and poetry. He picked up certain key moments from the plays Dante's Death, which was written in 1835, Leonce and Vienna, which is in 1836, and The Incomplete Voiselle, which is 1837, as well as Buchner's only short story, Lens. Buchner, by the way, died when he was only 23. So all these very, very brilliant work he had written by the age of 23. Buchner plays the role of an equator, the central figure, as Celan charts out. In terms of concepts, Celan picked up quite a few of them. From Being and Time, the idea of truth as unconcealedness appealed to him, and he took note of the corresponding idea of being in untruth as an essential characteristic of being in the world. The idea of truth was serious for Celan, but unlike for Heidegger, it did not mean any abstract principle, but a real characteristic showing itself through openness, candor, sincerity, and in negative terms, the opposite of deceitfulness, falsehood, shallowness. If I'm reading fast, you can let me know, I'll go slow. Celan found post-war Germany mired in untruth. As Lyon clarifies, the truth Celan passionately sought in his poems was not metaphysical, but something specific, to be established temporarily through time, event, and person. That's the basic problem that Celan raises in Heidegger. Heidegger uses speculative language, whereas Celan constantly wants to draw specific historical meanings and draw Heidegger into those meanings with regard to what was going on at that time in Germany. While reading Being and Time, Celan also made two notations. One, the question of how poetry's permanence is related to time, and two, that poetry stands more in relation to world time than time. Taking the notions of truth and time together, Celan made a twist of something he read in The Question of Being, where the philosopher had written how through forgetfulness, a past entity, quote, concealed or lost from memory, could be brought into unconcealedness or unconcealment of thoughtful memories. Celan translated past entity into what was in the past, or that which happened, thus fixing the concept to a specific historical event of post-World War II Germany, where there was rampant forgetfulness around him, working over time to obliterate the memories of the Holocaust. For Celan, truth as well as time were tied to the notion of memory and forgetting, centered on specific events in historical time, and he read Heidegger's concepts through that lens of understanding. It marked a decisive shift in the Meridian speech. The other crucial aspect regarding Celan's reading of Heidegger are the concepts surrounding language. Celan noted in his intense reading in 1953 of Heidegger's essay, Wrong Path. This essay called What Are Poets For?, where Heidegger calls language the house of being. In the fall of the same year, Celan writes a poem titled The Changing Key, and he uses the same metaphor. He says, with the changing key, you unlock the house where the snow of what silenced is driven. Once again, we find Celan taking up Heideggerian concept to make a crucial alteration. If language is the house of being, that house no longer offers an image of calm and security, because inside it lies a frozen silence that is bound to confront the poet even when he tries to enter the house with a changed key. While reading Being and Time earlier, Celan had approvingly noted Heidegger's thought of keeping silent being a fundamental aspect of poetic discourse. But it appears to me, by the time Celan wrote with the changing key, he was aware of the silence within the silence of poetic discourse. That silenced silence, Celan must have felt, needed to be uncovered for the sake of truthfulness. What Heidegger called truth, Celan called truthfulness. The other thing about language Celan picked up from Heidegger is the speaking to us of language, speaking to us being this word. This is not a term, but more of a word than a phrase, which Heidegger uses in the German. This speaking to us of language is coterminous with the speaking to us of being. Celan added to it his idea of conversation that takes place full shape in the Meridian speech. He formulated a dialogic discourse where the poet is not merely listening to being, but is in conversation with being. Going further, Celan makes a more radical move upon the Heideggerian contention that language speaks to us through a poet, by asserting that through language the poet also speaks. So he is turning Heidegger's idea that we speak through language by saying that the poet actually speaks language, he intervenes. So he's trying to make, he's trying to give agency to the idea of the poet. And how and why he does that, we'll come to that in the end. This granting of the poet his own voice takes the idea of the poem away from Heidegger's notion of the poem's timeless condition. Celan situates the poem back into time, as the poet alone has, Celan says, a sense of the clock's hands. The poem to Celan is always bound to that which happened. Celan's interest in dates and times are specific marks on the poem, where both calendar and clock come to converge into a moment of creation that allows for the poet to emerge out of the sea of language and announce her presence. It appears Celan picked up the concepts around being but avoided getting deeply into the question of being itself. In other words, Celan did not seem to be interested in the speculative questions of being per se, of being as such, but got interested in the concepts in relation to being, which is true, language, past and present. Everything that Celan learns from Heidegger connected to being, he finally uses to formulate what can be called an otherwise than being. Otherwise than being is a phrase of, is a concept also of the French ethical thinker Emmanuel Levinas. We'll come to that in a bit, in passing though, because Levinas is not really a part of Celan's head. The discourse of being wasn't allowing him to find itself. A poetic finding, Celan was later discovered through Buchner and Manash. Reading Heidegger, Celan seemed more interested in the questions of being in the world and did not seem to consider it with the same suspicion of inauthenticity as Heidegger did. In the same vein, Celan perhaps did not find pure authenticity in the house of solitude. In the house of solitude, where we dwelt poetically, truthfulness and uncoveredness were for Celan the tests of being, and it was possible to be in the world. Perhaps, and it is in keeping with the many perhapses in the Meridian, Celan stayed away from acknowledging being because he would finally challenge it with the notion of the wholly other. The Meridian is now banging on the door, and I shall open the door and usher it in. So far, I have not been talking about the Meridian per se, or what the speech is about, because just trying to give you a background of what he has been with Heidegger. These are very new things for me as well, and might sound a bit obscure, but I just thought, just to give you a hand of what's going on behind the scenes. So the next part is called Towards the Inhuman. Celan begins the Meridian, and now we are directly talking about the speech. Celan begins the Meridian speech by pulling out instances from Buchner's works to highlight a special characteristic in the form of a radical representation of art. To begin with, there are three instances where Celan identifies three figures of art. A puppet, who is the subject of conversation in Danton's death, a monkey wearing coat and trousers in verse there, and an automation in Leonce and Leno. All these figures, strange creatures, act as technical snacks in the human story. These figures introduce the uncanny side of art, where art goes, in Celan's words, beyond what is human, stepping into a realm that is turned towards the human but uncanny. The reader finds what Celan says as uncanny in the human stepping of the human in human art, uncannily resonating what Heidegger wrote in Introduction to Metaphysics. With regard to the question, what is man? Heidegger says the answer that man is a rational animal is a zoological answer, and thus questionable, until an ontological answer is found by interrogating the essence of being. For Heidegger, the answer to the question, what is man, cannot be an answer, but rather a question, where man determines himself in interrogating himself about himself. Looking for the origins of being before the Aristotelian city-states, and looking for a poetic retrieval of the ordinary sense of history, Heidegger reads Sophocles' Antigone in his move to reach the place, the polis, where the dareness of being, which is the Dara of Dasein, exists. It appears like a state of shared rule, where the sovereigns, for example, the men who hold power, the army, the navy, the council of elders, the assembly of people, they rule as much as the people like the priests, the poets, the thinkers, as well as the gods. So this appears like a state of shared rule before the city-states come into being, where the sovereign rules alongside the others. Derrida then shifts his focus to how Heidegger translates Antigone's use of man as violent or terrible as uncanny. To Heidegger, as Derrida points out, man is uncanny because he departs from the familiar, from the customary limits, the horror of habitude. Derrida also brings in Freud's essay in Uncanny in this regard to conclude that it is from this uncanny relationship with the familiar that man gains sovereignty and superlatively his sovereignty. This uncanniness, Derrida points out, is also equated with strangeness by Heidegger in his text from this German poet called Georg Buchner. So he's basically talking about this idea of the uncanny, which for Heidegger is man's homelessness, this constant tendency of not being at home. For introducing the uncanny figures into his plays, Celan calls Buchner the poet of the creature who calls art into question and by giving it a radical direction. Celan finds Buchner's moves unsettling for the taking for granted notions of art. In the same vein, Celan interprets how in Darton's death, the unartful Lucian's cry, "Long live the king," heard in the direction of a petrol entering the Place de la Revolution, is a word against the grain, a counter-word, an act of freedom, and the first step. So there is this moment in Buchner's play where there is a march is going on and it's a revolutionary march, where somebody suddenly shouts out, "Long live the king." And it apparently sounds like a very reactionary kind of a shout. But Celan says that it is actually, the king is not the real king, it is not Louis XIV, but it is somebody else, or something else. To Celan, this exclamation by Lucy was not homage to any monarchy, to any yesterday worth preserving, but to the majesty of the absurd. To Derrida, Celan wants to detach this counterword from its political code and counter-revolutionary meaning. Instead of seeing the cry as a pronouncement in favor of the monarchy, thus of His Majesty King Louis XVI, Celan places it in favor of the majesty of the present. This majesty is also a poetry, of the poetic act embedded in Lucian's cry, a discordant note in the political moment. In contrast to other revolutionaries, Dante, Camilli, and the rest, queued up to be killed, who did not lack words and dared to march towards death in their cries, case was theatrically popular. Celan, like Buchner, was on the side of the revolutionaries, but like Buchner, Celan was aware and critical of the suicidal violence by Robespierre. Once revolutionary violence attains power, the ethical and moral compass undergoes a shift and the revolutionary has to answer for his deeds. Killing Danton for his further refusal to take part in shadowy killings of people who were suspected by the revolutionary apparatus was not what Buchner and Celan would endorse. Even then, the artful words of Danton and others on the appeal of the guillotine were within the larger revolutionary theatre of the political moment. Celan was also aware of the Russian Revolution, what the Russian Revolution had done to its poets. His radio play on the poetry of Ossip Mandelstam begins with the speaker saying how Mandelstam welcomed, just like other Russian poets, the revolution. For Mandelstam, says the speaker, revolution is the dawn of the other, the uprising of those below, the exaltation of the creature, an upheaval of downright cosmic proportions. It unhinges the world. Unquote. It sheds an oblique light on Celan's preoccupation in the Meridian. Like Buchner, Mandelstam too pays attention to the creature, but one forcibly put on the stage of history, art and poetry, stifled to perform a rehearsed script, but either by sheer presence or by utterance creates an uncanny moment. Lucille's cry broke open not only her own silence, but the silence of those other muted, uncanny creatures on stage who were not allowed a word. Lucille carried forward the absurdity of their presence and their silence. Celan knew more than anyone else the importance of the uncovering of the strange silence, falling like a sharp spear of truth into the dark heart of time. It is by performing such a feat that art, true art, resembles poetry. Now I turn to the part which I find more exciting, and this is the direction I would like to take in the future of my reading of this text, which is this whole idea of the other and how Celan reads Martin Buber, and we'll do a bit of Levinas in between. And hopefully you will find this more interesting if you didn't find the thing so far as exciting. So this part is titled Towards the Holy Other. In his 1958 Bremen speech, Celan mentioned Martin Buber by name. A year later, in 1959, the Bavarian Academy of Fine Arts and the Academy of Arts in Berlin sponsored a lecture series on language, where against Heidegger's lecture on the monologic nature of language, Buber offered his dialogic view of language. Celan learned of this debate from newspaper and friends. In the late 1950s, Celan also bought a copy of Mandelstam's collected poems. In 1958, Celan declared Mandelstam as the metaphysician. After all, Mandelstam had studied philosophy in Heidelberg, a fact Celan knew. Around the same time, Celan came across Mandelstam's 1913 essay titled On the Interlocutor, where Mandelstam writes, and I quote, "I find the bottle in the sand, read the letter, learn about the date of the event, and the last will of the one who perished. The letter, sealed in the bottle, is addressed to the one who finds it. I found it, therefore I am the secret addressee." Unquote. And in 1958, in his Bremen speech, Celan had this to say, and I am quoting, "A poem as manifestation of language, and thus essentially dialogue, can be a message in a bottle, sent out in the not always greatly hopeful belief that somewhere and sometime it could wash up on land, on heartland perhaps. Poems in this sense too are underway. They are making toward something." Unquote. Way back in 1953, Celan had read the term being underway in Heidegger's Wrong Path, where with regard to Rilke's poetry, Heidegger asks, quote, "Toward what is his song underway?" Unquote. Celan also knew of Heidegger's persistent use of the term being underway in his essay The Principle of Reason. In the Meridian speech, Celan takes the direction of thought further and alters the pessimism and hopelessness of Heidegger's being underway. He acknowledges to begin with, I quote, "The poem is lonely. It is lonely and en route. The author stays with it," unquote. So both the poem and the poet are underway and both are lonely. Celan next raises the question, does this very fact not place the poem already here in its inception, in the encounter, in the mystery of the encounter, unquote. So already at the moment of inception, the poem lacks something. It does not lack being, but it lacks the other and other. Celan unravels the desperation. He quotes, he says, "The poem intends another, needs this other, needs an opposite, it goes toward it, he speaks it. For the poem, everything and everybody is a figure of this other toward which it is heading," unquote. So the poem, like a message in the bottle, is always underway to meet the other and put an end to this inceptional loneliness as well as the loneliness of its journey. For the poem, says Celan, everybody is the other. But the other is also the strange, the estranged, the uncanny, and the wholly other. Be it the puppet, the monkey, Lucille, Lenz, or the other side on the other side. The mysterious other, the reader who will recognize the poem and give meaning to the message in the bottom. This other is wholly different from that other everybody of Heidegger in time. We will not go into Heidegger anymore. Celan's view of poetry as a form of searching for oneself in the sphere of the other is, as Amin Ishel quotes, a turning back, which Ishel says is a turning away from the centricity of the self, from the centricity of care, which is restricted to Dasein's well-being. Celan's turning back, Umkehr in German, Ishel points out, is different from Heidegger's Kehre, which is the path always leading back to oneself, one's own language, to the solitude and supremacy of the self. Celan found incredible for someone like Heidegger to conceive such a realm of comfort despite having witnessed 2 world wars. This turning back in Celan appears in the Meridian speech, where he quotes Malebranche from Walter Benjamin's essay on Kafka about attentiveness being the natural piousness of the soul. Ishel explains how Celan, in the process of reflecting on turning back, situates the Jewish in opposition to both the Christian Messianic tradition and to Heidegger's fixation on being towards death. At this point, a little mention of Immanuel Levinas perhaps would be illuminating. Levinas was a Jewish ethical thinker who had raised the question and concern for the other. Levinas' other is not merely a speculative category like Heidegger's being, but the other is also a sensuous and affective category of experience, which Levinas places in the presence of the face and in the face-to-face encounter. Celan's desire to move away from the question of being to the question of the other and the otherwise than being echoes Levinas' language. In his essay on Celan, Levinas acknowledges this affinity between his thinking and Celan's idea of poetry. Levinas calls Celan's text, the Meridian, an elliptic, elusive text, constantly interrupting itself in order to let through, in the interruption, his other voice. He draws attention to the paradox of Celan's entirely other as someone who is also very close. Celan's other, much like Levinas' conception, is therefore a figure of proximity, who, Celan says, is conceivable perhaps again and again. Here, I would like to add a crucial distinction that Celan seems to be making between his notion of the other and the other of Levinas. The Levinasian encounter is the encounter of the face-to-face, what happens between 2 faces. Whereas Celan's idea of encountering the other across the meridian of time and history is first of all not a face-to-face encounter. This is a radical moving away from the ethical in Levinas, from what at first glance might appear to be very Levinasian. The message in the bottle which is thrown to the sea is a rushing towards an encounter beyond the realm of familiarity. Celan's other resides beyond the familiar and always without a face, yet The promise of rushing towards the other, beyond the horizon of the face, gets its solace from Celan's idea of the meridian. This is the last part. Short one, it's starting toward the future. The future of the poem in Celan is its setting itself free. But language can set itself free only when, according to Celan, it is actualized. To Celan, is language actualized, that is, set free under the sign of radical individuation, which, however, remains as aware of the limits formed by language as of the possibilities it opens. This is once again a response, a negation of Heidegger, for whom language is always and only speculative. For Celan, however, every poem is actualized language that is always mindful of its specific coordinates, the first coordinate being the date of the poem, which is the 20th of January. Every poem Celan writes has its 20th of January inscribed. This is the day when Lenz journeyed through the mountains and lost his mind. It is also the same day in 1942 when the Wannsee Conference took place, where the final solution to the Jewish question was made, whereby most of the Jews of German-occupied Europe were to be deported to Poland and exterminated. Celan's parents were one of them. This 20th of January is specific both to the poem as well as to the poet. For Celan, the mystery of the poem is impossible to unravel without the mystery of the poet, because it is the poet who adds the story of its location and of the date to the poem. As Derrida says, and I quote, "A date is mad, that is the truth, and we are mad for dates," unquote. Celan's madness for the madness of the date is a double madness, that of the poem and that of the poet. That leads us to the question of Celan's rejection of Stephen Mallarmé's idea of the absolute poem. Says Celan in a quote, "I'm talking about a poem which does not exist. The absolute poem, no, it certainly cannot exist." At one stroke, Celan tries to break away from the Heideggerian notion that in a poem only language speaks, and the post-structuralist thesis, which is Olavar's and all of them, that the author is the subject of writing and not a person. Celan says in the Meridian that writing is born of a conversation between the I and the you, between one who has a name, the one who speaks, and the other who is named and addressed in the poem, that brings its otherness into the poem. Since for Celan, not only the poem but also the poet speaks, the poem is not considered without identity swimming in the sea of language. The poet is, however, not identified with Celan in the sphere of intentionality either. The poet is simply two things, a date and a location. The poem for Celan is a movement across time and its uncertainties towards that mysterious encounter with the mysterious, wholly other, whose face is not visible yet. In this turning back of the poem towards the other lies what Celan identifies as poetry's destiny, which he adds with perhaps is an actuality, a turning of our breath. This turning of our breath for Celan is that moment of missing our breath as the reader, where elusive cries longing at the king. This turn of breath is a return to history. Without such a turn, there is no return. There is this necessary turning away from Heidegger and Beat to be able to return to history that acknowledges and desires the other, waiting for the message in the bottle. It is necessary for Celan's idea of the future, of poetry's future, or the future of the poet, to be more specific, to have four characteristics. One, despite being inclined to the revolutionary principle, Celan's idea of the future of the poem is not invested within any idea of collective solidarity. The reader is always and only in relation to the revolutionary principle, but is always capable of the critical moment of dissent which produces the perfectly absurd moment for poetry. Two, the future of the poem also lies in the future of remembering, where remembering happens across the specific coordinates of time and location. Three, the future of the poem also lies in its lonely, passionate desire to escape the conditions of being and its timeless, secure comforts. And 4. The future of the poem is turned towards an other without the familiar promise of the face, but rather a movement across the meridian towards the sea, where a truthful hand, as truthful as a truthful poem, might pick it up. I must mention here that there is this famous poem by Celan, where he calls a truthful poem to be a truthful handshake. He actually compared a poem to a handshake. And there are many resonances you can figure out about the handshake and the poem. That, the way a hand reaches out to another hand in a handshake is very similar to the way a poem is trying to reach out to the readers. So desperate handshake, desperate poem. Reluctant handshake, reluctant poem. So that's it. The reader is the future of the poem. She is the light against the dark loneliness of the poem. She brings the poem to light. But the future of the poem also waits for its past. Perhaps not all poems, but those written under the shadowy days of persecution and madness, days that suffocate the poet and the poet who turns against his breath, leaving behind another date for the reader to ponder on. 20th April 1970. That's the day Celan committed suicide by jumping into the Seine River. Thank you.
Could you tell us more about this actualization thing you were talking about? It's really confusing.
Right. There has been this general criticism of Heidegger that his language is speculative, whereas the actual is what is really happening at that moment. So, which is about the specific and which is also historical, whereas Heidegger's language is not, it is linked to historicity. You can make a large kind of understanding of what's going on, the community and its destiny and stuff like that. But it's not strictly speaking talking about something specific, something which belongs to the moment, which is historical. So it's actually in that sense, right?
He talks about a future which is the past's future.
Okay.
So, and then you also talk about like actualization, which is sort of living in the moment. If I'm correct. So, this living in the moment, this living in the moment, how does it like that? In his poems, there is always an inscription of the date, 20th January that you mentioned. So, I was just trying to understand, like, does a poem, is there a need? I don't know. Is a poem always are his poems always inscribed by this date in such a manner that that date is forming a relationship with his present?
not maybe that one particular date doesn't have to do with it. He is just taking that date as an example to say that every poem is rooted to a particular moment when it's written. And through that date, one will get to understand the whole atmosphere of the poem. Why is it being written? What's the drive and the necessity behind writing that poem? So that's what it basically talking about, the coordinate of time and the place as well. So where you are writing, when you are writing, is kind of linked to what you write.
So it would be like a very, very specific contextualizing of the moment of writing, the
Yeah,
time of
I think so, because that's how Celan really looks at situating himself. He thinks that all poems are situated in a particular moment in time, without which we will lose the deeper sense of where it is coming from. And also because he was writing at a particular time when it was so important to really be this name and be this person, the Jewish person who is writing at this particular terrible time in history journey. So he's trying to really enforce and force that point. Yeah.
Do you want to say something about the distinction between truth and truthfulness? I'm not sure if I fully got it. The distinction between truth by Heidegger and truthfulness as Celan was trying to.
So here probably I understood from reading the difference. So for Heidegger, the idea of truth is again a kind of speculative idea of truth. That it is linked to the idea of being and stuff. Whereas Celan is trying to situate truth also, this abstract idea and category of truth, into truthfulness, where it is linked to speaking the truth. Because he's saying in Germany during that time everybody is lying, and he's also having a quarrel with Heidegger, saying that Heidegger is actually, when he's talking about truth a lot, he's actually not telling the truth, he's keeping silent. So he's trying to force Heidegger into speaking about what he's trying to hide. So this is the kind of polemical game also he's playing with him. He's also trying to seriously challenge him in that way. So that's how it happens. So truthfulness is the truthfulness of an act. An act of truth is what is truthful and truthfulness. So he's saying that just don't really talk about truth. You must speak the truth, say the truth, come out with the truth. Because everywhere around him he could see, and even Heidegger being very silent on the crimes that are happening around him. So he did not want them to hide behind these very speculative, abstract concepts of truth and not speaking the truth in the real world where crimes are taking place.
Can you also elaborate more about how when you connect poet with the tale and occasion?
Sorry?
When you say that poet is a tale, poet is about two things, tale and occasion, can you elaborate more about that?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that he is trying to attach a specificity to the poem as well as to the poet. He is trying to say that it is not the Parthian kind of thing that the author does not exist, the poet does not. He is saying the poet exists. And the proof of existence of the poet as poet in the poem is the date when he is writing it and the location where he is writing from. These two coordinates go to prove and specify the presence of the poet in the poem. So he is not into the author is dead Vana discourse, he is actually saying that he exists and he exists because of these two things. Sorry.
So now after you mentioned last in the poem is like a message in the poem.
Right.
And you often use this phrase, message in the poem.
Right. That's a phrase by Mandelstam which kind of picks up. Right?
So basically, when you were talking about being underweight and when this phrase came up,
Right.
so what was basic? Can you just explain or elaborate the connection between the two?
Yeah, it's interesting and it's tricky also, and one can also think on this on one's own in many ways. But what I figured, and I'm still trying to figure it out, is that there is something about the destiny of a poem, that a poem is written and it carries a secret message, and it's kind of thrown into the sea, as in it can be thrown into the future sea of time or whatever way you want to see it, and then it is picked up by this particular reader who understands what the message of the poem is. I am here, in fact, not very sure whether Celan actually means that there is only one specific reader who can really get the the secret code of the poem, or there might be others. I'm sure he means others, or there are many. I mean, it cannot be just one reader. But it's generally saying that the poem is underweight in the sense that, as it says, that the poem is lonely, and the poem is a lonely thing. And the moment the reader starts reading it, you open the page and you start reading, you're actually trying to retrieve that lonely journey of the poem into your own space and time. So that's how the poem is recovered by you from the page, and the poem shares its secret with you. So it is that kind of a relationship which is mysterious, which has a lot of hope for the poem being a very lonely product of time, getting related to the reader. Right.
Could you then also add upon, I think somewhere you mentioned, you used the word accident or something, I'm really unsure. But then could you also talk about the relationship of the poem with time and perhaps circumstance and accident and such things? In the sense that when you refer that he talks of this poem being picked up by a reader, the other, if I'm not wrong, then this picking up, I mean, what sort of relationship does the poem have or the author have with this picking up?
With what?
With, I must clarify a little in the sense that this comes to my mind because there is this metaphor of a message in a bottle has been used quite a lot in the sense that, it has been used in films, it has been used in a lot of other media. So, and there is always that element of circumstance and accident to that picking up of the bottle and opening of the message. So what sort of what does Celan have to say about that? In the sense that what relationship does that poem have with whatever the act of picking up that poem?
I think...
if it's lonely, then maybe it doesn't share any relationship, perhaps.
No, I think it does. I mean, it is merely lonely, but it is not indecipherable. So, I think you're right. I mean, it is about an accident, and it is about fate and destiny. And it is about this person picking that particular message in the bottle up and reading it and understanding it. And so that's, in a very simple sense, the reader helps the poem to unfold, right? I mean, it is still constricted by time in its page. Until the reader does not open it up, it is in a kind of a closed kind of a state of being. So I don't know if there was anything else you can say whatever you feel like. From wherever you're coming from, you can just.
No, so I think I sort of clarified the context in which I was talking. So I was trying to look at whether he sort of tries to delineate a fate of the poem.
I think he must be trying to do that. Yes. Because it seems that he has a lot of hope that you know that it will be picked up and read and stuff. So though he has this bleak kind of idea of the poem, but still he has this idea that this very bleak poem will be taken up in the future and read by someone. So that is how he is actually linking up the desire of the poet with the desire for the reader. Yeah.
That's also curious in contrast to his trying to, I mean it's in a different context, but he's trying to intervene with Heidegger and asking him to come down to specifics.
Right.
So in contrast to his asking for a specificity, this sort of, when you talk of the fate of a poem, I mean, I don't know, I'm simply sort of thinking aloud here.
Right. You're right. Yes, if I get you correctly, he does talk about specificity in terms of date and location, where the poem is coming from. He's very strict on that. But when it comes to the reader, when it comes to the poem's future, there is a very unspecified kind of sense of time and location that he has, which is true. Which is good perhaps in a way because he is leaving the reader free. The reader can come from anywhere at any time in the future. So the future is open and free and there's a lot of hope in the future. But the present is completely confined, constricted, and you have to speak up. So the poet has to speak up, a lot of demands on the poet, a lot of strictness on the poet and the poem, but a lot of freedom for the reader, from where he's coming from, where he's going to come. So yes, there seems to be a lot of unspecifiedness about that. That's true. That's true. It's a good question.
In fact, that was a contrast that interested me as well in fixing a very, very specific time and spaces for the milking of the poem, and then the randomness of how it's distributed and perhaps never picked up. And then I begin to wonder whether the reader is expected to in some ways identify the specifics of the making of the poem.
I think that expectation, but Celan has this expectation that the reader is finally going to unearth and find out and retrieve the kind of details that the poem is coming from. So he does have this hope that the pain and the confinement with which these poems are written, that somebody will liberate the poet's soul to say from that confinement into something else. Yes.
Also, I don't know, I asked about circumstance. I can recall a particular instance of where I sort of thought of the question. There is this Kieslowski film called Pripagik. So in that there are three parallel scenarios, three parallel plots running, which change precisely because of one accident, and the whole plot changes. So somewhere down the plot, there is this instance where two people dig up the earth and they find a bottle and a message inside it. But the meaning of those messages have entirely changed in those three plots. So how does what relationship does circumstance or accident have with the meaning of a poem?
Exactly. I think that is where we can really speculate on our own, and that freedom we do have to really look at this whole movement of recovering the poem, where we give it our own meaning and the real meaning completely changes. And I think I'm sure that Celan may not have been stupid enough to think really that that exact thing is going to really be passed on. But yes, but I'm sure that when we read it, we will read it from the horizon of our history, our moment, and we are surely going to change the meaning of the poem and see it with very different eyes. That's for sure. Yes. And we may also misinterpret what there in the poem, and I'm sure we have all the freedom, all the right, all the legitimacy to misread a poem.
And that for us today, that we being a sort of future of self, this day being the future of the living, how does it alter the, not necessarily alter, how does it describe or resituate into itself? Can I think in those terms? How would we think?
Yeah, in the future somebody might look up on this moment as some kind of joke that happened also, in this room. Some very abstract kind of a joke. Maybe I'm just joking.
That is possible, but it's not about the interpretation per se. I will just ask that. But is there what is the real contemporaneity that we look into of the past itself? Tell us now about future. It's what I can think of, like, in terms of it, right? I certainly feel like Heidegger is my contemporary. It's not, in a very serious sense. Paul Celan is my contemporary, or any of the people. It's strange, it can be, whatever. And there's moments of to invoke the idea of future in the very spirit of this contemporaneous, one suddenly finds oneself in. So how does that alert us to the notion of future itself? Like, how does it all work?
I think that the element of strangeness that is being talked about, which Celan talks about, perhaps can give a clue that the fact that this encounter with the other, this encounter with future time, this futureness of, this contemporariness of the past, there is a strangeness in it, and this encounter and all encounters are essentially strange. Like there is a deeply strangeness to the idea of the encounter itself. So I guess the strange element of it will never disappear, and perhaps that is what it is. That there would always be an uncanniness, a kind of strangeness through which we will relate ourselves to the past, and the past will relate itself to us. And we will relate to the future as well as the future will relate to us.
I have to ask you a question. I don't know what to ask, what I want to ask, but the thing is that my thoughts have been going very rapid. I thought maybe I should ask what is bad poetry. I thought maybe I should ask what is non poetry. Because I seem to have problem always when I start reading poems that it's too sophisticated, it's too too much up there, and I'm from there, so
sometimes poems which is too much up there can be really bad actually. Poems which are like down here can be better.
I don't know. But I mean, why is it not that ordinary? Why is it always so up in the air? I don't know. I mean, is there some category called bad poem? Or is there a category called bad poem?
Bad poem.
There's lots of bad poems.
But who decides what makes something bad?
The good bad poem.
I guess there are no standards or anything that everyone is relaxed.
I don't know, that's the...
No, I mean, like, if, where do we put the...
Poetry, basically my question is what is non-poetry?
Not poetry, or non-poetry.
What is non other than poetry? I mean, what I'm trying to argue is that it's all the perspective that with which you look at something.
Sorry, yes?
It's the perspective with which you look at something
Yeah.
that makes it poetry or...
Yeah.
philosophical statement can be as poetic.
Absolutely.
I guess that's
So, so my question is, what is not poetry?
No, I think there would be, first of all, a distinction between, we can make a distinction between the poetic, what is poetic and what is poetry. So poetry would be a particular, it will have tradition, so the tradition can be absolutely diverse and radically diverse and all kinds of things. But the poetic can be anything. It need not be in poetry. The poetic is there in all forms of writing, all forms of action, all forms of things. And I remember I written this article once during the 100th year of women's movement, where I said that Manorama's fast is also a kind of poetry in action. Though not try to really eulogize it in a particular way, but really saying that that act is also a poetic act. For me, any act which is radical, which can challenge power, and it itself has a very intense kind of beauty in it, and it also can be very poetic, very radical kind of poetry in some form.
So you were talking about poetry being something like handshakes.
Yes.
And you said desperate handshakes and desperate poetry.
I just kind of lose the
No,
that's not here.
so what will be desperate poetry in that?
A desperate poem, very simply, from this analogy, would be a kind of poem which is desperately trying to seek the attention of the other person. As simple as that. And that desperation can come from various reasons, for various reasons.
Also, one more thing which you just now said, that poetry is something that can challenge power. Can it be said in that sense about art in itself, like any kind of art?
Absolutely.
I was talking about, I was thinking about many Celan's dating and contextualizing the one. One is, the moment you take it falls value with the history, right? The moment you, I think it is in time and place. The other that I was talking about, if that is the case, Heidegger's silence. This Heidegger also talks about the impossibility of language, right? Now, how would we, why is there no space for the impossibility of language within, history? In Celan's understanding, why would we say that there is no space for, or why would Celan have this?
For silence.
For the impossibility of language, it's almost like the penalty of evil. So how would we account for that? Within, let us take Antigone for example. Like, it is possible to read it as two ideas of community. Right? One is a very statist creance could be a very statist way of understanding the community. And the other is a kin-based, if you want, Heidegger is going for the understanding of community. Right? That is, being is always being with. Right? So now, the thing is, the only possible answer is death. That Antigone, has to die. That is, how else? Because there's no other way to reconcile this.
There's no other way to?
Reconcile. That, this is, or you can't have the millennium unless you're saying that the poet is, almost Christ-like figure, who can redeem the moment.
I think, if I get you correctly, I think the first, what redeems or who redeems is not the poet, but perhaps the reader. And I think like he said, the poem is lonely. There is a dismalness around it. So the poem is actually being written in the atmosphere of death itself. But what redeems that atmosphere for Celan perhaps is this being towards the other. The other is, I think, the idea of the other, the presence of the other, and the hope of the other is what takes it beyond death. Because the moment you think of beyond death, you actually talk of the other. And I think it is the presence of the other, and that the poem is towards the other, that brings the element of hope, that brings the element of hope into this whole transaction between the poet and the reader. But that is the Levinasian or the Weberian moment that Celan is trying to break away from this, this very deadly scenario of the poem being surrounded by death and it's going to be death, but the other brings hope, so yeah, I think that's.
In some ways, like it's a very kind of simple trajectory that it takes, because in giving it this specificity of time and place, it's adding to the materiality in a sense of the world, which then makes it difficult to ignore. And yet at the same time, even with the hope, because the poem cannot completely exist without the reader, it's out, it's such a simple metaphor, the message in the bottle, in a sense of randomness, and also it may or may never be completed by the reader, in a sense. So, in a sense, it's not that hopeless, because it's been given that materiality, and it's been given that possibility for redemption, in a sense. So, it seems like a very young person who is tortured as well as who is full of hope and optimism, where the possibility does exist. So it's a pity that he committed suicide, and that he can be there, but that optimism didn't kind of carry it through, for him through his life. Just a comment, it was. Any other questions, comments? Do you have any of his poems with you?
Celan's poem, I'm afraid we
What about you?
Any of your poems?
Yeah. Do you have anything of yours?
I thought, yeah, she told me so. Oh, sorry, but it's very available online. You can just go a lot of
Almost everything is available.
What about
Any of your poems?
The site itself called
yes, they must be all. They must be sorry. So you will get all of them. His very famous poem is Death Fume. That one poem.
That's few, that is.
The same
That
painting
painting.
that Isfara made a series of painting on
We have heard that you are a poet. Please give us.
Yeah, she said that will get. Don't be boring. Okay, so Moshami told me to get my book along with the read out a few poems of mine from this book. So I will read out.
what is the title?
It's titled Ghalib's Tomb and Other Poems. Yes. Anybody from Kerala here? So, so I'll start with this first poem, which I had written almost 10 years after I had gone for this friend in Moatapura. And so this poem is a kind of a tribute to that wedding I had been to. And it was actually particularly, it happened I think perhaps because of his father I had met, one of the most interesting people I had met in that wedding. So I was unable to forget him. And through that, and also of course the first time I want to carry out a train, and it's best to go there by train. I was completely mesmerized by the beauty of the place, and I did not imagine that this kind of a setting could happen on its own. So, a lot of beauty traumas I went through here. So all that I recollected and I wrote this book. So it's titled Wedding in Moatapura. It wasn't the road that took us to Moatapura. It was the avalanche of trees. So improbably lined, you wonder if a god did it secretly overnight, or a band of mad gardeners toiling against sloth and poverty. The trees did not point towards any address. They gestured towards an unknown fairy tale. Our ride ended at the foot of a house. It was more dream than body, more wings than pillars. The gate's reckless heart was open wide as we walked in, rousing cobblestones from sleep. Men folk, like cheerful coconuts, welcomed everyone at the door. We exchanged names in hurried gestures of forgetting, till we met the father, who hid grapes in his mouth and wore a face older than his tongue. He was a feeble who would charm a tavern full of strangers. A beehive of women folk made haste to ensure the food pacified the appetite of gods. Aroma from the kitchen seized our attention as the mother of fish and spices gently greeted us. The artist who sketched the house peered from a photograph like an oak tree. Invisible drawings flowed in his beard. A windfall of relic caused a giddiness impossible to hold without a glass of spirits. We climbed the stairs with liquid expectations and discovered the smallest bedroom in the world. The bar on the terrace overlooked an ancestral tree. Its trunk was more trunk than I could be that wet afternoon. I was a young bachelor on the bar stool, watching the rain pour over a monotonously beautiful landscape. The sun beat the clouds just before oblivion. We climbed the church stairs and witnessed a wedding under the rainbow. Old hymns of youth rang solemnly in the men's memory as oaths encircled him. The town arrived half wet for the grand feast. They drowned in a toast of blessing. The men drank as endlessly as the rain, and the ancestral tree shed its leaves. Yeah, this poem is titled Poetic Delhi. It it mimics Lorca's poem called Poetic New York. And so it has a kind of irony in it, the title, that, how can there be a poet in Delhi, and what is a poet doing in Delhi? So that kind of thing. So Poetic Delhi, and it has an epitaph, which is from Shahid Ali. Can you rinse away the city that lasts like blood on the beaten tongue? Delhi, where parents lift the weight of tombs, poets offer daggers to deepen wounds. History travels from harem to brothel. Delhi, where slang is a comma in the coma of speech. Sex with your sister conveys a euphemism. Abuse is a birthright denied only to beggars. Delhi, where strangers mix facts with fables, friends conceal the past in smoky avowals, lovers spell their names on stones forever. Delhi, I pound your night of toxic questions. I escape your streets of towering morgues. I loathe your hot air of dead ramparts. I lose my heart and get into your history. Delhi, I recover my mirrors in your cousins. Delhi, I offer my childhood to your pigeons. Delhi, I rescue the sun from your debris. Delhi, accursed city, I recall your heartbreaks of barking moons. Delhi, grotesque city, I read your mutilation of petrified blood. Delhi, desecrated city, I see your vanished moons in the eyes of gypsies. Delhi, surrogate city, I hear your future on the dreamer's lips. Delhi, each time a victim writes your death, your violators bring you to life. Yet how long will you play this game with yourself? How long? Every year you parade the Republic's ritual, the saga of remembering, flooding the streets of forgetting. The title poem? Okay. There are two, one small one. So there are two poems, Gharib's Tomb 1 and 2. One is very small, 2 is also smallest. So Gharib's Tomb 1. Look how death forges new ties and throws old ones asunder. Look how death forges new ties and throws old ones asunder. Asadullah lies a few yards from Khusro, while Bahadur Shah sleeps in another country. So this is Ghalib's Tomb 2. Your pleas for a poet's dues went unrequited. Now admirers bribe to enter your tomb. You drag endless clouds and moonlights, but no one is allowed to drink where you lie. Your kafir heart swayed between Kaaba and Kalisa. A disinterested butcher now overlooks your grave. Children feed liver to the hawks who visit you. Together they pay oblivious tributes to your guts. You long to purify existence, mulling the Ganga. Beggars about your tomb sleep careless of flies. You lit the dying lamp before the new darkness fell. It hurt when old virtues were sold to shopkeepers. Your couplet wafts like incense to the bazaar. Your heart was always heavier than your eloquence. Okay, I just wanted to read this poem. It's titled Effects of Fetishism. It's on Lakshman. It is said Lakshman never looked up beyond Sita's feet. The sight became his daily obsession. He left his wife's face at home to gather penance and followed Sita's feet into the forest. When Lakshman returned home after 14 years, all he recovered was the memories of Sita's feet and the wrinkles on his wife's face.